Committee is also requesting documents from organizations, including the Justice Department and WikiLeaks. All right, breaking news once again to share with you at this hour. Ontario MP and President of the Treasury Board, Jane Philpott, has announced she is resigning from Cabinet. Philpott was most recently serving as the Treasury Board President and Minister of Digital Government. In her letter to the Prime Minister, Philpott references the SNC-Lavalin case, saying it is concerning for her. She says a minister must always be prepared to defend other ministers publicly and speak in support of government policies. She says, given that, it is, quote, untenable for her to continue as a cabinet minister. Philpott also served as health minister and minister of Indigenous Services. For more on this, I want to bring in Stewart Prest. He's a political science instructor at Simon Fraser University, joining me today from Vancouver. All right, Stewart, what is your first reaction to this, what I would call quite a stunning resignation?
I was shocked. It really was stunning. I was not expecting this. It goes right to the heart of this government in her role as president of the Treasury Board. She was one of the instrumental pillars of this government in cabinet. So it's a significant piece to lose in and of itself, but then the reason she gives just makes it that much more devastating, seems like the word for the government.
Yeah, and just looking at her resignation letter, it is quite clear. It's not ambiguous. She's not leaving for family reasons.
No.
We've boarded it here. She says she's been considering the events that have shaken the federal government in recent weeks, and after serious reflection, I've concluded that I must resign as a member of cabinet. Although I must regretfully resign from cabinet, I will continue to serve Canadians in every other way that I can. I was elected as a Liberal Member of Parliament for Markham-Stouffville, and I intend to continue in that role. So reading between the lines there, although, again, it is pretty clear, Professor, are we to make of this that there is a divide in cabinet right now where people are polarizing and lining up either behind Justin Trudeau and the Prime Minister's office and Jody Wilson-Raybould?
It's starting to seem like that is exactly what's happening. We're getting more and more signals. So last week we had some MPs, some from the backbench, who were voicing questions about Jody Wilson-Raybould, whether there were questions about her ability to handle stress and things like that, and it's really seeming like they're finding reasons to line up behind the Prime Minister. And here we have clearly another faction and a very senior member of cabinet acting on what she says is effectively her conscience. And so this is a Liberal Party that is of two minds right within caucus.
So, again, I think part of the reason why the Trudeau government is getting so much heat on this SNC-Lavalin issue is the fact that he made a big deal when he first came to power that his government was going to be different. Sunny ways and all. You know, it was 2015. We're going to have gender parity in cabinet. We're going to really focus on the Indigenous file. That was his most important relationship, he said. And now here we are today, 2019. He's got two female cabinet ministers resigning, one of them an Aboriginal woman, a very strong Aboriginal woman. I mean, this does not look good anyway. You slice it.
No, and Jane Philpott herself was previously Minister for Indigenous Services, so it's everything. It's hard to imagine a scenario that would be worse. Everything, just as you said, that this government committed to do. These developments have undercut those claims, and so this would be hard for any government to ride out without having to react in some ways. And we're going to really have to watch and see whether the government at this point and whether the Prime Minister's office comes up with a different strategy in response, because clearly what they've been doing to this point isn't working even within its own caucus. And so that's just not going to be sustainable going forward.
So what strategy might that be, in your opinion and expertise?
Well, they seem like they've been trying a couple of different things, and I mean, we've sort of been waiting for them to pick a clear strategy. At one point, they were trying to give space for Ms. Wilson-Raybould to talk, speak her truth, as she said, and yet we had these sort of whispers about quiet critiques, and so there was this back and forth about whether they're pushing back or whether they're just sort of embracing her message. And at a certain point, they may just have to admit that perhaps they could phrase it along the lines that whether they were not intending to step over the line, but perhaps admit that they were too zealous and say, apologize, or say that they took it a step too far, and having heard what Ms. Wilson-Raybould said, that they understood why she perceived it the way she did, and then commit to a different direction going forward. So, I mean, at some point, you just have to take the L and move on, and I don't know they're going to be able to push back.
So it's interesting you phrase it that way, because after Ms. Wilson-Raybould's testimony last week, I waited and watched the Prime Minister come out a little later that evening and talk about, he was asked about her testimony. And I was surprised, frankly. Initially, he said he didn't watch it all, but, he'd have to give it some thought. And then he almost, in essence, doubled down on the fact that he doesn't understand why she resigned from cabinet. There were legal discussions on SNC-Lavalin. If she interpreted it as too much pressure, and I'm paraphrasing here, it wasn't meant to be overt pressure or aggressive pressure, or however you want to phrase it. And I was almost surprised that he wasn't a little more solicitous, or not to fall on his sword necessarily, but to take a little more responsibility. And so clearly that was the tack they were going on, and hoping that perhaps this would all blow over and maybe ride it out until the next election. But today's move, the resignation of Jane Philpott leaving now, can he still take that stance? Because now there are 2 female ministers who have resigned.
At a certain point, the numbers within the governing caucus will become a problem. The hunker down strategy works if the vast majority and all senior members are on side. But if it proves that there is actually a more significant faction, and we're just left to speculate, we really don't know where the vast majority of Liberal members are. But if it turns out that there's a significant push from within caucus to try to take a different tack, then we'll see action. Right? There is a role for the caucus to play here. The Prime Minister can't go in his own direction indefinitely if he doesn't have his own members in support. So that's I expect there's going to be a sharp discussion, or more than one, around in that the next party meeting and caucus meeting, and then we'll have to wait and see what comes of it, whether they still try to take this sort of different perspectives and we've done nothing wrong, we stand by our actions, or whether they take that more solicitous approach, as you mentioned.
We're almost out of time, but is it at the point, in your opinion, Stewart, that the Liberals need to cut their losses in terms of Justin Trudeau as their leader, elevate someone else to the position, and then carry forward? Or is it too early? Like we saw Andrew Scheer call for his resignation last week, and people were saying, no, Andrew Scheer, you're jumping the gun. There's no need for that now. Are we at that point now?
Well, I expect we'll hear more calls from the Conservatives along those lines. This adds more fuel to that fire. There's a certain amount we don't know, and in essence, it's a political question, and so it's up to the party itself to decide, right? Whether they think that this is something that they can recover from, or whether they really do want to do a clean sweep. It's interesting, speaking in terms of comparative politics for a second, if this were happening in a different country, say Australia, where they are much more used to cabinet spills, as they call them, and they replace prime ministers a little more frequently from within their party, that might have already happened for all we know. But that's not something we're accustomed to in Canada. So I think they would be very slow and very cautious about taking that move. But it seems like they have to do something different at this point.
Stewart Prest is a political science instructor at Simon Fraser University, joining me today from Vancouver. Appreciate your analysis, Stewart. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.